Did you notice that the whole internet looks like it is collapsed when AWS goes down? After this, everybody start to panic. There are lots of tweets that you need to migrate from AWS, that it is not reliable, and that a lot of companies failed because of that. And I realized that most people misunderstand what exactly AWS downtime means. So by the end of this video you will understand what is the problem, if you should migrate to other provider, or the problem lies in your architecture. Not so long ago we had an AWS outage, and let's be realistic, it was around 30 minutes, so it was not long, but it felt like the whole internet was down. And the amount of problems in different companies and scary posts on Twitter is enormous. You could see news like, for example, this bad company, which were using AWS in the beds, and their beds were connecting to AWS and sending lots of information, and it could not run properly after AWS went down. And such things happened in a lot of companies. I was using several different websites in the morning and all of them just stopped working completely. Which brings us to the question, what exactly was affected? Because a lot of people on the internet wrote that the whole internet just went down. And this is not true, because AWS is not the whole internet. Yes, it is one of the major providers and lots of companies are using that, but it is not even a quarter. Why is that? Because not the whole AWS went down, just a single region. Yes, you heard that true. Which actually means if you was hosted in some different region, then you was not affected at all. This is why when you read posts like AWS went down, it is completely misleading, because it was not even down completely. But what exactly happened? They had a problem with DNS records and their other services stopped to work correctly. And just to make it clear, this will happen sooner or later on any provider. There are no providers which can be always uptime. Most importantly, that the issue is fixed fast. And here is an important point, not all websites went down even when they used AWS. Things like, for example, Google or Twitter didn't went down. Why is that? Because major services are not using just a single region. They have their own plans what to do if one region stops working. Which actually means doesn't matter which provider you are using, your architecture, when you are a big player, must be scalable if uptime is important for you. If you are just a small business and you can be down half of an hour, then you should not even bother. The next group of posts that I saw on the internet is that everybody should migrate from AWS to another provider because AWS is not stable. This is really far from true. AWS is one of the biggest providers on the market and it has lots of different services. I don't really see what you win if you migrate to another platform. Yes, sure, you can use Azure or Google, but it won't change a thing. It is just a major provider and yes, it also can go down. If you was affected by this problem, you should not just blindly change a provider and pray. You must have a plan what to do if it happens again. Like, for example, a multi-region setup or maybe multi-cloud setup. So the problem most often is the architecture and not a provider itself. Another group of posts that I saw was about AWS is bad because with it half of the internet went down. And yes, it is partially true because lots of services are using AWS and all these services can go down when there are problems with AWS. Obviously, when they don't have their fallback plans. So the bigger player on the market that we have, the bigger the problem will be. So I totally agree that this problem exists, but it exists exactly because AWS is so big and has so many services which are really useful for lots of companies and people. You can't change anything here, just plan accordingly. The next group of topics is even worse. People are writing that you don't need AWS at all and you can simply use a $5 VPN which you rented somewhere and host your project. This is as far from truth as it can get. Sure, if you have a project which has like 50 users per day on your website, you can host it on $5 VPN. You probably don't need AWS at all. Can you use it? Sure, but does it bring anything to you? Not really. The correct answer here, the big projects are big and the smaller projects are small. Which basically means if you have a small project, sure, you can rent just a single VPS, pay a small price and you're done. But when you're getting bigger, you can't get away with that. At the very least, you need a bigger server there. But basically, you want even more servers, balancing them and so on. You need a proper infrastructure. And you either support it yourself, or you need to pay money somebody to do that with your own rented hardware, or you are using something like AWS, and again, somebody needs to support that. So no, you can't replace AWS with $5 VPN. This is why all big companies which has lots of requests per day or big and difficult services, they're using providers like AWS because in the long run it is cheaper for them. But if we are talking about hosting your own personal website that you just created, then VPS is the way to go. And this is exactly what we are doing in my middle to senior bootcamp, where we deploy to production on their own server all our projects. Which brings us to the last point. AWS is expensive. And these are really weird comments online because this is not some new information which was spontaneously revealed. Everybody knows pricing of AWS and how high it can be. You can check it on their website, and obviously it is more than $5 VPS. When we're talking about providers and not just bare-bones servers, you are getting a lot of stuff on top of it. This is why it always will be expensive, because there is a lot of created logic which was written for you, so it is easy for you to use something. AWS does exactly that. You are paying for your comfort. And here is one example. I need to process all my videos for my website. To process just one video inside AWS, it costs around $40. Obviously, it is extremely expensive for me. This is why I wrote a simple bash script with FFmpeg, which does it completely for free in a matter of minutes. Does it mean that AWS is expensive in comparison? Sure, but it can do such things in parallel with lots of resources, different formats, and all this stuff is already prepared for you as a service. It is not cheap, but you are getting it out of the box. So again, it means the AWS probably is overpriced for a single user, but when you start scaling with bigger business, it makes a lot of sense to spend your money there. AWS is not perfect, but it can solve lots of problems, especially for bigger businesses. But from my point of view, every single developer must know how to set up their own server from scratch to get a full understanding how it works underneath. So if you are even using AWS later, you know how it works under the hood. And this is exactly what we are doing in my middle to senior bootcamp, where I help you to transform yourself in a senior developer. So check the link to my bootcamp in the description under the video.